The Lighting Specialist in Controls certification is a way to boost and support the distribution channel within the lighting controls marketplace so that effective and satisfying lighting controls are sold, installed, designed, and overall implemented for projects. All right. I mean, so basically this whole certification is to get people who are either wary of or less knowledgeable of or uncertain about lighting controls to get into lighting controls. And it really gives a lot of options. While we are certainly targeting the distribution market, the goal is to have this be applicable to anybody. And we are aligning with a lot of different groups, like, for instance, NAILD with the Certified Lighting Controls Practitioner, to make sure that our curriculum aligns perfectly with that. But we want people who are in the distribution channels to pay attention to this, because distribution, when it comes to lighting controls, is one of the weaker territories. A lot of distributors and a lot of contractors who do just direct sale from distribution or direct sale from manufacturers are really having some issues with lighting controls, and we want to help smooth that over. There's a lot of great technology out there that we're going to cover in this certification that is available to people, but it's maybe lesser known, or just, something that, I don't know, maybe you've had a bad experience with, or you've heard of a bad experience with. But what we found with lighting controls is that it's really the education that matters the most. If you know what you're doing, there are going to be a lot fewer issues with your lighting control systems. And so, and it's just even minor stuff, like, just understanding how a motion sensor works, understanding ideal placement of a motion sensor. What is LLC, luminaire level lighting controls, and how does that affect a project, and how do you best implement a system using LLC? All of those things, if you learn a little bit, you really are that much further ahead of your competition. And it really benefits the industry to have knowledgeable distributors and installers out there. So something to keep in mind also here is that rebates for LEDs are evaporating. We're seeing utilities really de-incentivizing just straight fixture sales, and now you have to have lighting controls to be able to get those rebates, whether it's networked lighting controls, NLC, where you have power packs and remote components, or LLC, luminaire level lighting controls, where you have sensors and components embedded in the fixtures, prefabricated at the factory. Those are what's getting the rebate incentives nowadays. So being able to step up your knowledge and capability with lighting controls will get you that much closer to taking advantage of the incentives that are out there from the utilities, because of the fact that we're seeing LEDs no longer being incentivized. With this course, we have 3 certification tracks. We have a designer track, which really, any project out there with lighting controls should have somebody who understands systems, understands how to design systems, and can provide documentation to support that design. That's what the designer track is for. And while it's still focusing on distributors, so maybe a distributor hires an in-house designer or they work with a third-party designer, but really that's at the beginning of a project. Whether needs to be done in 2 weeks or can be done next year, you really should have somebody asking the right questions, putting everything into documentation so you have that information tracked through the project. Once design is done, that's where we get into the second certification track. And with this certification, you can only do one at a time, but we're going to have later on a sped up version for people who have already gone through this once, so you don't have to do all of this again. Once you've done one track, we'll have one that's accelerated for you to either take one or the other, or both of the other tracks. So the second track, sales and distribution, is focusing on how do you take a design and then sell it. And also, how do you ask the right questions if you don't have a designer involved, where to go? Because you should absolutely, if you ask the question, hey, is there a designer involved, and they say no, then you should reach out to your colleague who's gone through the design track and say, hey, they don't have a designer, we need a designer involved. But there are a lot of questions you can ask even before you do that. And there's also a lot of work that's done once a design is completed so that the sale and provisions are done. So just because a design lists out part numbers doesn't necessarily mean it's complete. So making sure you have a complete bill of material and that you're also stocking inventory in your warehouse or that you're just sort of understanding the sales channels of lighting controls really supports that design and also helps create that bridge between design and installation, which is the last track. So installers, people who actually want to be the boots on the ground, do the installation support. And this isn't going to be, you have to start up a whole DMX multiprocessor system. It's just going to be, how do you make sure that the motion sensor's sensitivity is set correctly? How do you make sure that walkthrough parameters are set or masking on the device is done correctly? Or even just, is the keypad programmed to what the end users are going to be using that keypad for? That's really what that track is for. And so it's not that we're replacing any labor that's existent right now. We're actually creating additional resources for projects, especially, again, if you don't have, for instance, a lighting designer involved in a project, then this kind of ecosystem that we have here is ideal for that, because this is kind of supporting those projects that wouldn't otherwise have a lighting designer to begin with, wouldn't otherwise have some oversight. And additionally, you don't get the manufacturers very heavily involved, so you wouldn't have a manufacturer's rep, which is oftentimes where you see in the spec world. When you have a design team involved and you have like a very thorough system with complex capabilities, you have a manufacturer's rep involved in this project. But in these projects that we're kind of identifying with this certification, it's more that we don't have a rep involved, we don't have a design team involved, but we still need oversight. And so we're kind of positioning the distributor channel and distributors to be that oversight. And they can, if you take this certification, you pass the proctored exam, which we're going to have at the end. You will be endorsed by a list of brands that we're working with right now. And that endorsement means that you are supported by that manufacturer. You kind of operate, I wouldn't say you're operating as a rep, but you're operating at least as a extension of those manufacturers so that their products are implemented correctly. They can really make sure that the projects are done correctly. And additionally, you can charge for that. You can add on additional labor and services to your project costs so that you can really kind of scoop up that missing gap of scope that otherwise has existed in these sorts of projects in the past. If you want to register, we have a pre-registration right now. We don't have the full registration, but that is coming. If you want to pre-register, which will secure you a spot in one of these three tracks, you go to NAILD, NAILD.org/LS, stands for Lighting Specialist, -C, stands for Controls, so Lighting Specialist in Controls, NAILD.org/LS-C. That's where you would go to pre-register for this. And we just ask a few questions for you, such as which track you want to participate in, but you could always change that later on. We just want to make sure that if you are interested in doing this, that you have a spot secured for you. What's great about this is that we're partnering with Lightivation, which is down at the Dallas Market Center in 2025. This will be happening in June of 2025. And leading up to that, we'll have 3 webinars that are going to be mandatory. You have to take those 3 webinars. They'll be 2 hours webinars leading up, 1 a month, and then it'll be 2 full in-person days, which will be intensive training days, hands-on experience. And then the final day, which will overlap with the first day of Lightivation, will be our proctored exam. And in the installation track, for instance, there will be a practical installation exam component. So you have to prove that you know what you're doing to be able to be a certified installer. But once that's over, once you go through the exam, and hopefully you'll pass the exam, not only will you just be able to attend Lightovation, which is going to be right in the Dallas Market Center as well, but also we're working with NAILD to get you some discounts or recognition with the CLCP certification. So you'll be able to take the information that you've learned from this class and move on and work with other groups to get those credentials if you want to even expand your listings. But what's beneficial about our listing is that because it's a closed ecosystem, hopefully there are going to be groups in the other tracks that are going to be able to see the list where you're listed in once you pass that exam and reach out to you and say, hey, I need a designer, I need a salesperson, I need an installer. And that way it really is supportive of each group that they need to kind of lean on each other so that we really make sure that the right skills are done by the right people. Each track has unique requirements. Each capability, whether you're a salesperson or a designer or an installer, you need to know different things. And you don't necessarily need to know those specific things when you're doing the other job. So that's why we're trying to keep this contained. We're trying to make sure that people are specialized in what it is that they're doing. If you're a salesperson punching numbers all day, you don't need to know how necessarily to program a specific sensor. But if you're an installer, you absolutely do, but you don't necessarily need to know the price tag hidden behind all of the components. So, it's really important that we're dialing in to what people need to know for that task. And again, you can always diversify. We'll find ways to make sure that you can take the accelerated class later on if you want to take all 3 tracks. But, I would say focus on what you specifically want to be doing for your job to be better at your job and to add that capability, those benefits to the work that you're providing to your customers and your clients. Because that's what the goal here is with this certification.